Hey there, friendlies. How's up? Welcome to the 18th of May episode of my live stream. I hope everyone can hear me. I hope all is well. I hope everyone's having a good week. Let me know how the sound is, guys. I have the mic slightly differently positioned this week. And what I want to talk about tonight, hold on a second. Let me just mute my damn self and minimize it. Oh, I can't minimize that. Sorry, folks. This is real pro of me here. There's something I want to share. Hey, Chris Garland. Nice to see you. Simon. Salut, monsieur. Tenenbaum. How's it going, sir? Mark. Hello. So it looks like we've got a nice team developing here. So what I want to talk about is that was not a good cork pop. That's better. What I want to talk about tonight is self-sufficiency. Specifically, what really is it? That's maybe making it sound more highfalutin than it is. What I want to know is, how possible is real self-sufficiency? And by that, I mean on several levels. I think that several of the people who, when I say several, it means I'm talking about like 4 people, but I'm gonna let that sit there for a few minutes. Hey, Martin, how's it going? What I mean by is self-sufficiency a myth, which is what I put on the thumbnail in a moment of what I consider to be kind of bratty genius. What I mean by that is when you YouTube in the bushcraft space, you end up knowing a lot of other people who bushcraft. You also know a lot of people who paddle, and you end up knowing preppers and homesteaders and self-sufficiency type people. And I love the goal of self-sufficiency, but excuse me, but I feel that has to be tempered to a certain extent. Like, logo of my second favorite Tuesday night live streamer. What I mean by that is you can only, in a modern sense, you can only ever talk about self-sufficiency to a degree. What I mean by that is you can make all your own furniture. You can have a garden. You can have 40 acres and a few animals and stuff. But self-sufficiency in a modern sense is almost a nebulous thing. Like, how many people who are straight up homesteaders can rebuild the engine on their F-150, if something goes wrong, or can, knock a door into shape out of molten metal if they, there's a lot of self-sufficiency in terms of growing your own food. You got some animals, you're cutting down wood. Maybe you've got one of those Alaskan chainsaw mills, or maybe you've got one of those bigger ones, whatever they're called, with the circular. Wrangler Star's got one of those. I'm kind of jealous of that, but I'm kind of jealous of him having that much land to play with as well, which I don't have. But that's all sort of what I would consider modern homesteading style self-sufficiency. In a smaller sense where I live, I could clearly, there are books on making your own furniture, right? There's a classic for you. There are, and I'm saying books because it makes an example I can hold up on screen. There are YouTubes, and there are people who can just apprentice or whatever. You can build a log cabin and furnish it with your own, the work of your own hands. You can build shelters out in the woods, right? And in fact, these old books, and especially the woodwork and home building books, are written by guys for whom a certain amount of self-sufficiency is part of the background noise. It's not something that they had to strive towards. It's something that they grew up with. This guy, D.C. Baird, this entire book is assumes that the people reading it are, excuse me, are old school Boy Scouts. Like the language in the book is about, how a small scout troop can build this log cabin in 7 days, kind of thing. Come on, light. I'm trying to get this thing to focus here. Trust me, there are diagrams there. And if you go even like camping in the world where Horace Kephart was camping was a much more self-propelled event. But even then, and here's where I'm getting to what I was going to say, but let me sort of push it off a bit. Like I have books on edible wild plants, but I sure as hell I'm not going to put this knowledge into action unless I first have somebody who knows their stuff take me around and show me, And so is that really self-sufficient if I needed a book or someone to show me what to do? I don't know. I'm not here to pass judgment. I'm actually here to have the conversation because I see those two words, self-sufficiency, they mean different things to certain people. Some of the guys out there, they're just looking for an excuse to, lock and load their AR and stick their finger up at the government kind of thing. If you happen to be a libertarian, that's all fine for you. It definitely is not on my side of the spectrum. Because to me, it's more about growing your own food and stuff. I've shown you guys this book before that I did while I was working at Reader's Digest, right? With this book, you can garden in any Canadian environment, and if you put the knowledge into effect, you're going to be successful. Anywhere in Canada, there's knowledge in this book for you. Okay, I'm not trying to sell you the book. I don't even know if they still sell it. But what I'm saying is, if you apply yourself with the knowledge, then you will be less dependent on the market, the food market, the food industry. But would you call that real self-sufficiency? Like straight up self-sufficiency? Or is it, I don't want to say it's ersatz self-sufficiency. I'm more comfortable seeing the whole thing as a spectrum, a range from this guy can't do anything for himself. He just keeps throwing money at the problem of living life, to, someone who naps the stone for the axe he uses to chop down the wood he uses to build his home. Huge gulf in between those two people. And the thought that made me want to do this discussion tonight, and I'll put up the invite for anyone who wants to come on and briefly talk about this. I was just musing on this because I was looking at transitional hand planes on Kijiji, because I'd like to get one where the beach block is just wrecked, but all the hardware is good, because I want to try making, restoring one and carving out the openings and everything. I was thinking that, it's funny how some people don't ever want to do that. I don't want to do it because I cannot have a plane otherwise. I want to do it because I like looking at things that I made myself. That workbench that I have in there, whenever I go in to go and get like a little scotch or something, I always take a moment to look at that bench. Because it's big, it's heavy. Is it perfect? No, but I made that. I made that with my buddy Robin. So I have a lot of really good memories tied up with that. I didn't buy, because let me tell you something. You want to buy a workbench, you go, clickety-clack, leevalley.com. There's some beautiful Swedish-made benches there. But if you buy a workbench, you're spending $1 bazillion. And that's just, I'm bringing that up because I'm into woodwork, but it's a microcosm of the larger issue, is that you can throw a lot of money around just to get through your day-to-day life, or you can learn to do a few things. And the more you learn to do and unhitch from the machine a little bit, well, if you're me, the more attractive the idea of self-sufficiency becomes, because everything goes from being a cost center to an accomplishment. And I don't always get to feel accomplished in life. So, every time I successfully do something that I have hitherto only dreamed of actually being able to pull off, man, it gives me the fizz. Speaking of the fizz, I'm going to take a little sip of my scotch. For the whiskey drinkers out there, Deanston Virgin Oak. It's the only Deanston I can get in Quebec. I just shot a review of it for my other channel, but I haven't edited it yet. This makes me want to try more Deanstons. So there are certain things that I want to do as projects. Excuse me. Going forward, I sort of went down the wrong. I want to build a cedar strip canoe. I've mentioned this before, and I haven't brought it up in a long time. I don't mind it being like a kit that I buy, because I don't need to source a cedar, cut it into strips, dry it, and then make the canoe. I just want to have the hands-on experience of making one. I want to make a log cabin. I want to win the lottery so I can finally afford some land. Anyways, that's a different thing. But like, I want to do these things. But that's not real self-sufficiency, though, is it? That's modern self-sufficiency. That's taking stuff that someone else has put the building blocks together for and then making something. And when I say modern self-sufficiency, I keep sort of going back to that series Tales from the Green Valley. That was, I think it was a BBC show, or maybe it was a Channel 4, I don't remember. British show. 5 historians dumped onto a 12th century farm that was still in existence for a year, and they had to make it work using only the techniques that were available when that farm was in action in like 1140 or something. But here's the thing about that. If you want to plaster a wall, you have to go and essentially mine the plaster from, dig up the whatever the material is called. But if you want to dig that up, you might first have to build a pickaxe or something, or some sort of hoe. And to do that, you might have to knap stone if there isn't. I mean, I'm sort of going back past the time of that farm, but it's because the thought process is, if you go far enough back, before there were specialists making axes and selling them, or there was a mill with a miller who does nothing but mill, and that's like before there were people whose jobs it were to keep certain segments of society going, people had to do everything. Just keeping the day-to-day life going took all day, right? Napping out an axe, cutting down the tree, maybe digging up the sand that you need to make some sort of concrete or cement or something. Like, I'm pulling all kinds of weird examples together, but that is the pinnacle of self-sufficiency, right? That is it. And even back in prehistoric times, we've discovered that there were places where there were people taking flint out of the ground, like a flint mine. and then that would be there would be trade happening. But generally speaking, if you were in a farm out in the middle of nowhere, before there was a miller and a potter and all that stuff, you had to find ways of keeping your you had to find ways of keeping yourself equipped with the basics of life. I mean, every farm practically was making beer because drinking the water was not a great idea. But as soon as you boiled it up or fermented it or created alcohol, it was easier. You didn't go and buy a 2-4. And so I'm wondering, like, is it fair to judge current day self-sufficiency enthusiasts or homesteaders against that? I don't think it is. I think that we are always a product of our times, but there's a magic to that to me. There's a smell. I imagine that there's a smell to an 11th century farm that doesn't happen in a modern farm where there's an F-150 and maybe there's a sawmill, one of those, a diesel sawmill, and there's a tractor instead of oxen and all that stuff. And part of me wants to. I've mentioned this before, or maybe I was just talking to Martin about this. Like, imagine living in a world where the smell of the forest and a farm with no machinery isn't something you're like, wow. Imagine that's just the background noise of day-to-day life. Wow. Hey, Ian the Web Lord's here. How's it going? You know what? I haven't paid any attention to the side chat. Just let me see if... Oh, my land. It's okay. It's okay. Hike with Mike's here. Hey, how's it going? Raspberry Rock. Hi there, Russell. Anyone else I'm missing? Oh, got Chris Garland. Hike with Mike says the true self-sufficient folks would have been the Paleolithic and Neolithic folks. And, and I sort of, I think on that stuff a lot. I listen to a lot of podcasts that are about, deep history and stuff. Oh, Hike with Mike, a 2-4, right? That's a Canadianism for a pack of 24 cans of beer or bottles. I don't buy that kind of beer, so I don't buy the Molson or the Coors. So I think it's bottles. No, not a 2x4, Simo. I'm talking about a 2-4. Yeah, Pine Martin says brewing beer for most of human history was just part of cooking. Yeah, exactly what I'm saying. Like, these are like building a wattle and daub shed was just how you put up a shed. You didn't go to Canadian Tire and pick up a flat packed garden shed out of that cheap ass, was it aluminium or tin or something? No, you put sticks, you put wattle and daub, you put a thatched roof. The whole thing about coppicing, comes from that sort of a day-to-day. You coppice, you get these, you get these nice long staves essentially that you could then use for stuff like that. Okay, you call that a case of beer? I think a case. Yeah, I don't know. Martin agrees with Hike with Mike about how our ancient prehistoric ancestors were the true masters of self-sufficiency. Yeah, and as soon as you ended up with people specializing, then that sort of started to slowly disappear. Sorry, the missus just asked if I was online. Like, yes. But it's, as I said, you can't judge people like, like our friend Mal, self-sufficient as hell in a modern sense, right? Yeah, they're chopping the wood, they're growing their own food mostly. It's very hard to survive on only your own garden, even if you're a homesteader. But I wonder if that's more of a function of people being used to having the choices we have today, rather than basic nutrition. I'm not sure about that. I'm not the type to just make that kind of judgment from my armchair. I am the type to wonder about that stuff, though. Quest for Fire, yeah. I love that movie. The book, I don't have it anymore. I don't know what happened to it. Ian the Weblord says, in reality, there's always been a community that's shared. So I guess the level of self-sufficient may just be what works for you. Well, that's a legit point. I mean, because there was trade pretty early on, like really early on, like Ötzi early, right? Because Ötzi had a copper axe that had clearly come from far away. So there might be something to what Ian is saying here. So what's the pinnacle of modern self-sufficiency then? Well, Martin, I think that a lot of that inaccuracy, like we now know so much more about like Neanderthals and how they were not what I grew up thinking of them as, right? They were not these stooped ape, primitive apes. They were pretty damn sophisticated for that time. And I wonder if they made Quest for Fire now, how would that film be made? And I don't want to pull us too far off topic, but I mean, if you get me started about movies, we're gonna talk all night. But I still love that movie. Yeah. So the question I then have, oh bloody heck, I forgot that question I had. I'm putting the link if anyone wants to come on and have a brief chat about this. Yeah, like what's the pinnacle of the modern self-sufficient life then? Like very few people are willing to not have a tractor on their farm, right? There are very few people who are going to go back to oxen and a hand plow kind of thing. So do we judge those people against people from, deep history or time immemorial, as our native friends say it? Maybe not, because if to get into the program I was in university, I had to know Aristotle's Poetics back to front. I had to read it, I had to learn it, and when I went in for the interview to get into school, they didn't tell me which aspect of it I was going to be asked about, so I just had to know the whole thing. In my program, because I was one of the lucky ones who got in on my first try, which was probably the last time I ever did something that great. But anyways, in the program, there were a fair number of students who thought that Aristotle was sexist, and my opinion, which I didn't press because I was in the minority on this in that class, but my opinion was that you have to judge people based on their time. Everyone is a product of the times in which they live, right? So no, Aristotle was not sexist because it wasn't in in his experience, to not think the way he did. We now look at the times and think, okay, that was not a great time for women and for poor people and slaves. But you can't judge Aristotle poorly because he didn't have a philosophy that he would never have come into contact with because of the time in history that he was growing up. This sounds completely unrelated to what we're talking about, but it is related. You know, am I going to judge Wrangler Star against, you know, a Neolithic man because he's not, you know, making his own axes? I mean, he's got a forge, so he could make his own axes. So that's a, you know what I'm saying, though, right? We're all, oh, Cedar,
Hi, guys.
you're not in your basement.
I'm not.
Nicely lit, dude. You look all dramatic and stuff. Now I gotta bring up my game again. Damn it. I gotta buy more lights.
Just a regular work setup. Well, a bit different than yours, but that's fine.
Martin says, I'm so wary of people thinking it's important to evaluate people of bygone ages by our contemporary mores. That's the most ignorant form of presentism. I've never heard of presentism, but you're saying it pretty much what I was feeling back in 1998 or whatever. So yeah, I mean, so to me, like, I feel that we have to judge. We have to assume a certain amount of modern standard in what self-sufficiency is today. We have to assume that we will be depending to a certain extent on manufactured items. You know, I don't have a forge. I'm not going to pound out an axe. And I'm late enough in my life. I'm going to be 49 on Friday. It's late enough in my life that I'm not going to go back and start a new skill. At this time in my life, if I'm going to spend time on skills dev, it's going to be making my current skill set better. This is why I'm not taking up the stand-up bass, by the way. And like at 48, if I'm going to practice bass, I'm going to get better at the bass guitar. You know, so that sort of philosophy
yeah, fair enough.
Filters out for me, you know.
My point is a bit more pragmatic and maybe more realistic. I don't believe in self-sufficiency anymore.
When the world ends and it's zombies everywhere, you're going down, Holmes.
Yep. I'm fine with this.
Hike with Mike says the most important factor in being self-sufficient is having the time to do it. And like, is there a problem with the basic theory of self-sufficiency? Like, should the philosophy maybe not be more, okay, if the world does end or whatever preppers are prepping for, isn't it better to maybe build a community up again, a small community of skilled individuals?
I would not go alone. I would just do my best to get around the good people, but I would not be a part of any bugger group or whatever. I don't want to be locked into a single group where my fate will be decided by someone else.
But isn't our fate always decided by someone else?
Yes.
And by the way, before we go too far down this, I'm not trying to cast tonight's conversation in a, you know, was it SHTF kind of,
no, it's
there's all kinds of reasons to be self-sufficient. End of the world being the most Hollywood and dramatic and kind of the most fun to talk about. But I don't think that Mal is being self-sufficient in prep for, you know, the end days. You know,
I gave it some thought last year, because for some reason I was not working.
Why weren't you working? I don't get it.
Yeah, whatever. And anyway, my conclusion with this was more towards, I don't want to be stuck into a very, very rural or even woodland area. I don't want to be stuck into a densely urban area. But if I have the choice between both, I would choose the urban one rather than the forest one. My reasoning with this is a tightly knit community we will get through much harsher stuff than in a tightly knit community than alone. The leverage that you have into a community with different perspective, different qualification, different way of thinking will get you through many things. And right now, that little humanity that I'm part of has more than likely find its roots into the model that we have right now. I don't believe that switching back to 95% agriculture society will gives us something future-proof.
Okay.
I don't believe in a full specialization for anybody, but there's some places where specialization is a good thing. I don't expect to do open heart cardiac surgery tomorrow morning. Someone else will. Oh yeah, the open source ecology project.
Because we sort of went to the end of days, which I don't want to stay in, but I popped this into the show notes right before going on, because I do know people who are very, very into this thing, and there are people who are, building the tractor and the mud brick ramming machine and stuff. I'm
sorry to interrupt, but have you ever seen an adobe house in Canada?
No, but
do you know why?
Yeah, because of the climate. But I mean, it doesn't really matter, because what I like about this is the philosophy.
The philosophy behind this is great. I've been following its project for, I don't know, 10 plus years now.
Yeah, me too.
I was more into the open source at first than the rest, but they're basically going to rebuild. Well, something happened, and you want to start from scratch. This is the way to go.
Yeah. I just want to point out, Chris, as I said before, just in case you missed that, I put the link in the show notes. I think that if you were to build a small community around farmland, something like this would be kind of fun to play with at the very least. See if you can make a go of it. Some people are making a go of it. Other people just sort of mess around with it. I have done nothing except read this damn thing. There was a DVD at one point. I don't know if there still is, but I don't have a DVD player.
It's still only 6.4 gigs, so
yeah, so it doesn't really.
Yeah, and it's totally uncompressed and big too. So, oh geez, I'm geeking out.
Yeah.
That tractor is cool until you realize that you need a motor that runs on gasoline or diesel. Oh, and I don't have the capacity to refine this either.
Well, if you're doing diesel, you do. I mean, it takes a lot of work, but I mean, we probably both know people who've created a biodiesel reactor.
Yeah, but you still need some kind of waste product for refining, or even new product. At that, and it's not gonna work. I was listening to this morning to a podcast where they were talking about the Mercedes in the World War II that were run by a gasifier.
Mm-hmm.
That was crazy. Nothing else to say.
Which podcast was that?
Do you really want to know the 100 plus podcast that I'm trying to catch on every single day?
Nope, just the one you were listening to about that one.
I am not sure.
Okay.
I would need to dig.
Mike says, the art of learning and thought process being lost to technology, and those arts are a life-saving skill. When the power goes out, you cannot ask Alexa for help. You have to rely on your own intellect. That's just one of the reasons I will not have Alexa in my house.
I don't have any Alexa in my house.
The question though is,
she scares me.
So how big a garden does one need to be self-sufficient then, in terms of, and I sort of reiterate that a lot of people with wicked big gardens still go to the grocery store for some things. If you're heavily into eating rice, for instance, you may not be able to grow that yourself on a farm in Quebec, where I live.
Okay. How many times a day do you want to eat potatoes?
Well, I mean, once, twice, I don't know. If you take 600 years off of today's date, what you need to eat on the day-to-day is very different. But if you're living a self-sufficient, totally different, because you're not sitting down and working at a computer all day. You're like in the farm, you're in the fields and stuff, right?
Yeah,
so your nutrition balance is going to be very different.
The nutrition balance will be different, but at the same time, it won't be, because the only thing that you will be able to grow and to store is something that you know. You were not eating kiwis 400 years ago. You were not eating kiwis in the Irish famine in 100 years ago.
But that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is the balance of, say, bread and starches to meat to fruit and veg would have been different, because you had different nutritional needs, right?
If everything goes bonkers tomorrow morning, you won't have a job anyway to sit in your butt.
But that's not the interesting part of self-sufficiency to me.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, the end of the world doesn't, I mean, I probably won't live past the end of the world, so I kind of don't care.
So shut down the power grid.
Mm-hmm.
And move away and make sure that you're going to continue to live. What are you going to do?
What do you mean?
Well, you'll need to grow food. You'll need to heat your house. You'll need to fix everything in order to store everything to get through the winter.
Mm-hmm.
Well, starting from this point, what are you going to do?
If you're storing veggies long term, you're storing things like carrots and potatoes, right? Stuff that lasts for a long time in a cold room.
Probably rutabagas and other stuff like that. Yes,
a lot of root veg. You're probably going to dry some meat, just in case.
You're going to need some apples, some pears, so you need to start from scratch.
But you can dry those as well, right? I mean, if you're worried about winter, you have to preserve as much as you can.
About 15 years ago, when I was living in Eastern Quebec, I got to know an historian and sociologist, a retiree, and he was telling me about how the first inhabitants of that part of Quebec, when they came in, how they built their homes. And surprisingly enough, the first thing that they built was actually the basement. They dug a basement and they put a roof on the basement.
Mm-hmm.
Well, this is for insulation, and
That's
you're going to
climate
need,
controlled.
and you will need a basement anyway to store your crops and everything to get through the winter. So it's your cold room.
Yep.
So the very first thing that you were building was actually to dig a basement, do your stone wall, put a roof on top of it, and you may be waiting for, I don't know, anywhere between 2 and 10 years living in that basement for a couple of years, and for the time that you have enough money or resources to put a first floor. And you will probably put up a barn before you're putting your first floor in your house.
So self-sufficiency includes being able to build a rudimentary house when you arrive on land.
Will you do it alone?
No, I don't think so. Well, it depends, right? Because maybe, but maybe not. I mean, I used to live on the prairies, right? So, I mean, barn raising was a community effort.
Yep.
But
because you don't want to spend all summer long building a single barn and having no crops nor animal to butcher
right
in the fall.
Hike says you have to take into account crop loss from animals and insects as well and access to irrigation. Absolutely. Hike, where he lives, he cannot put a root cellar in, which is too bad. I would love to put a root cellar into this house, let me tell you. He says, in my climate, smoking meat and canning veggies are the only options for preservation. And those are definitely sort of becoming, especially in like the prepping community, those are becoming the de facto standards for meat and for food preservation, for sure. There were some sod houses, yeah. Not all, but there were some sod houses.
There were a few of them. The problem is they are not faring well into winter climates. Just that the cycle of freeze and thaw is pretty much a guarantee to destroy any sawdust here. Some example of cordwood homes and buildings are still existing. To my knowledge, there's 4 in Quebec.
So the question then becomes, okay, say you were going to build a Martin just said something interesting. I think self-sufficiency is a hopeless and ill-conceived ideal. What people really want is independence, to not feel dependent and subservient to others for their needs. That's what I was getting at when I was talking about how libertarians see the self-sufficiency concept. How it's definitely more of a get off my lawn thing than an actual. But like I sort of see, because even Sean James, his self-sufficiency is a little bit of a freedom thing.
Yeah.
And I wonder how
he wants to be as self-sufficient as possible, but he understands that he will never be.
Well, and that's sort of where I'm going when I'm talking about self-sufficiency in a modern sense, right? For instance, to me, I think that the more you can unhitch from the industrial food machine, if you will let me sound kind of tinfoil hatty for a minute, the better.
Just doubled it.
But I don't think that there's any constructive way to take on an anti-government stance. Do you know what I'm saying? Governments are there. They're not going to go away just because somebody waves an AR in their face. And that's why, like, I'm not into prepping in that sense. I'm not, you'll never see me on one of what was it, National Geographic had that Doomsday Preppers show that made
I
every
have
prepper look
no
like an
idea though. Nope.
absolute fruitcake. Um, that's where I'm not interested in the self-sufficiency thing. I am interested in sort of more the Sean James or what Mal does self-sufficiency, because it is less of what Martin was talking about.
I want
And
to be I want to be as independent as I can be, but I understand that I will never be self-sufficient at all.
well, no, because we're always hooked into
Yep.
everyone else. Like, for instance, what I was getting at the very beginning of this show was that very few people can grow all their crops, feed the horses, slaughter the pigs, and tear down and rebuild their F-150 or create the F-150, right? If we're going to go like full mythical self-sufficiency, they didn't buy the F-150. They built a machine. And this is where I'm sort of playing with, like, the idea of like modern self-sufficiency it's not a black and white thing. There's a spectrum, and not everyone who uses those terms really means self-sufficiency. What they're talking about is independence and libertarianism, which is not useful. It's not a useful way of discussing this stuff, in my opinion. Not going to get political. Especially because, hold on, give me 1 second.
Yep.
Especially because in terms of land use, a vertical farm makes a whole lot more sense than the romantic, farm that one thinks of when someone says the word farm. Like a really intense skyscraper farm. Like, I don't remember the name of the architect. But like very dense population is in some ways greener than very spaced out population, right? Because
sure.
But again, that's not really what I'm talking about. I'm talking about this whole self-sufficiency thing. Like, if it's a myth or not. Martin, in fact, did I already say that? Yes. There's no such thing as self-sufficiency, and agrarian self-sufficiency is completely short-sighted. Now, I know someone whose parents have a hobby farm, right? It's a subsistence farm, right? They make enough to feed themselves, and that's about it. But they have it just because they kind of wanted to do it. There was nothing political behind it. They weren't trying to unhitch from the machine or anything. But that doesn't become a generational farm, does it? Right? You're not founding a small community with a hobby farm. You're just doing it, and then when you're gone, they'll probably sell it off, and it'll become a Monsanto nightmare or something. So is that really? I mean, I would say that there is stealth self-sufficiency happening there in the short term. But it's like, I keep sort of coming around to what is modern self-sufficiency. Hold on. I think a good self-sufficient model would be a small center used for trade, at barter, that folks from the outside go to trade and then go back to their own land and only communicate trade on a weekly basis. That's a very sort of, if you take 600 or 800 years off of today's date, you would probably see something very similar to that in many parts of Europe. Hey, Dennis is here. How's it going?
Hey, Dennis.
Just taking another sip of my whiskey. Pine Martin asks, why the obsession with farming in connection with the ideals of self-sufficiency? Mostly because hunting is very hard. Homesteaders tend to almost always have some sort of farm. I think that having a small plot of, veggies is a good ideal to aim for in terms of being more food secure. Uh, I hunted for a long time, and some years we came back with something, some years we didn't. So there's a safety net involved with having crops and some cattle or animals on your farm that just isn't there when you're dependent on hunter-gatherer style survival.
I was hunting twice a year for white geese or snow geese.
Mm-hmm.
120 geese per year. And I was sick of eating geese after 2 weeks.
Yeah, I would be too. I mean, I like goose, but not that much. Not that much. Hey, I wonder if you could. Is that too fatty to dry? I wonder. Because goose and duck, they're fatty freaking animals.
Never thought of drying them.
Like I've made chicken jerky before. I've made beef jerky. You cut away all the fat. But man, ducks and geese are fatty animals.
Yeah.
I'd like to look into that at some point, actually.
Well, let us know the end results. I suspect it's going to be expensive and time-consuming, and you will probably get divorced by the end.
One of the many reasons. Hike with Mike says, hold on. Taking the historical perspective, all civilizations fall and folks head for the countryside, just like the Middle Ages. Yeah, the thing is, I don't want the yeah, right. Start that sentence again. Take two. I don't want the conversation to veer too much into sort of end of the world, zombie apocalypse, nuclear apocalypse, climate apocalypse, because that tends to be more fun to talk about, but it tends to veer too quickly into the Hollywood stuff.
No, if we're talking about Middle Ages, it's going to be Black Death.
Yeah.
So,
but I mean, it's I think I guess I play with this because I dream of having a little plot of land to build a log cabin on and grow a few things, right? And I do this thought experiment a lot. And so when I was thinking about this, I'm going to talk about this tonight, it didn't come out of the blue. It wasn't a bolt out of nowhere. It's the kind of thing I do a lot of thought experiments, which is, why I wanted to share why I want to just share this with you guys, because this thing plays into my thought experiments a fair amount. It's interesting to think of what if you were to build a self-sufficient life right now, without getting into sort of the political independent kind of libertarian thing. If you were to just want to spend less money on food and energy from outside, what would you do? What would you buy? What would you build? Kind of thing, Because I'm not going to create my own pickup truck or vehicle to cart stuff around. I would just buy a beat to hell something. Hopefully a Toyota.
I would not.
Would I buy chainsaws, or would I have big like pit saws and stuff? Well, it depends. I mean, as Martin can tell you, I would love the aesthetic of having, a medieval style pit saw and a big sort of 2-man. But at the end of the day, you got to get some stuff done between dawn and dusk, right? So, I mean, but the thing is, okay, if you have a chainsaw, then suddenly you're beholden to the gas company, right? Same as with your F-150. Do you want to reduce that as much as possible? Or do you care about that? Are you willing to say, okay, no, I'll do the gas thing, but I'll grow or hunt or whatever my own food? Do you want to be off grid, or are you okay with paying a hydro bill every month? Every month. like it's.
Or can you generate electricity?
Can you generate electricity? Do you have a river? Do you have enough space for that many solar panels? Do you have enough wind for an aeolien, whatever that thing
A
is called?
windmill?
Windmill. Um, I think about the spectrum. Where would I like to fall on the spectrum with my sort of romantic love of the old ways versus where would I fall on the spectrum in terms of just getting stuff done, not having to spend all of my time on food production or energy production or repairing thatched roofs.
Well, I would never go thatch roof here.
Hey, Shawnee. No, I wouldn't either, but it makes for a good example that everyone can visualize, you know?
Yeah. It's
Hey there,
cool
Sadstock.
when it's raining, but that's about it.
Yeah. Pine Martin asks, I wasn't suggesting a hunter-gatherer life, but I was questioning why people think farming is somehow sustainable over the long term. I think it's just because we've been doing it for... Well, you need to eat, and we've been doing it for long enough that it's sort of like squared away. You know, we figured it out. Now, granted, we figured it out, but, you know, there's hydroponics and stuff now that may create a smaller footprint. But again, I don't
agree.
I don't know about it. You know, I don't know enough about it to make a statement either way. Alain steps in with, maybe we can gather our money together and buy a plot of land we can all share. Talk dirty to me, man. Don't talk dirty to me, man. I'll go there. No, there are not solar powered. Actually, yes, there are. In terms of if you use solar power to power the batteries that you can use in a battery powered chainsaw, then yes, that's a solar powered chainsaw. I'm not convinced that electric chainsaws or battery powered chainsaws have the oomph that these big, stinky, loud gas ones have, but they do exist.
There is something that people have not seen, so I'm going to pull it out as usual.
While you're looking for that, I do want to mention this. Hike with Mike said, I love Henry David Thoreau, but he did prove self-sufficiency was a myth because he went into the woods to live deliberately, but just for a short period of time. Yeah, that's the thing about Thoreau for me, especially because in the opening pages of that book of Walden, he was really snooty about the city man versus the man in the country. Now, granted, he was 20-something, or he was a young guy when he wrote that book, right? Full of self-importance and vim and vigor and all that. But, you know, he was no Dick Proenneke. And even Dick Proenneke, self-sufficient as hell, without a farm, as Martin is pointing out. But he still depended massively on, you know, a plane coming in every now and again and dropping him a bag of rice, a bag of flour, this and that, some bits and bobs, you know. Like if you have a chainsaw, you still need oil for the chainsaw. You still need gas for the chainsaw. You know, you need to do your mixture. You need to have a chain tool, whatever it's called, you know, to sharpen the chain. There's a lot of manufactured stuff that goes into even a highly self-sufficient life today. And depending on manufactured stuff is anathema. No, that's not the word I'm looking for. Is the opposite of self-sufficiency. But you can't go back to the Stone Age. Even just because the Stone Age, you know, going back to the Stone Age means you might not be able to pay the taxes on the land you're living self-sufficiently on. You know?
Just drop a link for, we were speaking about motors, and that one is called a quasi-turbine. Actually invented by somebody here in Montreal. I've met the guy twice, and one of his child's a bit more than that.
Huh. Interesting.
But the beauty with this engine is actually, you can use it with pretty much everything. You can use it with
Peanut oil?
no, actually pneumatics, hydraulics,
Oh, I see what you're saying.
steam. You can use it with gasoline, and that's anyway. There's a version of this engine for a chainsaw.
Interesting. That is very interesting.
Yep.
A quasi turbine. Interesting. Martin says that there's no greater ecological catastrophe than agriculture. The advent of agriculture was a disaster on several levels. First of all, it sort of dovetailed with the rise of civilization, well, in the Middle East, and then spreading. If you were on Papua New Guinea, everything was very different. But it's it was a proven method to feed large numbers of people throughout history. The ecological side of it isn't something that was really that wasn't part of the equation for most of that time. Nowadays, we look at it and it's a whole different thing. Especially, if you look at the algae blooms in lakes that are near pig farms, for instance, absolutely. But I don't think that turning our back on farming wholesale is necessarily going to be a better concept. Like, I don't know what the okay, Martin. See, Martin's got to come on here and give his opinion, because what would you replace it with if someone was homesteading, for instance, if someone was trying to live? I mean,
if you want to homestead, that's pretty much impossible to get around without agriculture.
Who did?
If you are homesteading, so living on your land, it's almost impossible to do it without any form of agriculture.
Well, what if you have like I don't know enough about this, but what if you went the hydroponic route? Would you be able to, like, how big a space would you need? Thing is, but there you need electricity, right? So are you trading?
Yeah. It would be possible to do it without electricity, I would guess.
Mm-hmm.
But would it be really feasible or on the long term? That's another story.
Hold on, I want to talk about something here. First of all, Russell says he wants a battery-powered chainsaw. Well, you can buy them. Stihl makes one. Steel? How do you pronounce that? Stihl?
Yeah, there's DeWalt, Makita. Yeah. Milwaukee does one as right now.
Hike with Mike says the person who was the basis of the movie and book Into the Wild tried to be self-sufficient. Loved the movie and his perspective, but he was not successful. That was McCandless, right? And here's the thing. He brought a very urban mindset to that. So he was going to die. There was no way that was ending differently than it did. He was looking for something, but he was learning it as he went. And when I was in my 20s, I may have made that mistake. People do make that mistake. But the way he went about that was only going to lead to him making some stupid mistake and either dying or having to be rescued. So, I mean, it's a great story. And I mean, they finally had to move that bus that he died in because the local communities were constantly rescuing hikers who were trying to make a pilgrimage to that bus. So they pulled it out, and I think they're going to put it in a museum or something. But he went to a very, very difficult piece of land to get to, a piece of land that for part of the year you can't get out of because the way he got there is completely flooded. So when the shite hit the fan, he wouldn't have been able to get out. He ate something wrong, or I don't quite remember I haven't read this book in a long ass time, but at the end of the day, McCandless could not have survived that. He didn't spend enough time becoming what he wanted to be. And I say this as someone who, if you took me and dropped me there, I would end the exact same way. I would love to be able to tell you that that's not how it would go. But I have kids and a mortgage, so that's just,
Forget about mortgage.
you know.
Kids are important. The rest is not.
Martin said, I would challenge that it was a way to feed large groups. Yes, absolutely. But I still feel that with where we are, a subsistence farm is like, I don't know if I want to say it's the baseline or if it's the default concept of how to feed a family, right? Like, I don't know how else you would do it, because I would not want to feed my family depending on hunter gathering. How the hell would you say that? Hunting and gathering? Come on, Jess, you're a writer in your day life. Hunting and gathering. So, but if we're playing with the idea of self-sufficiency, then just going to Metro or Provigo or whatever, Safeway, I guess, isn't in the equation either. So how do you get your food together then? Do you trade with the local farmer? Because then you're still depending on a farm just by proxy.
Yeah.
That's
pretty much what's going on. You need shelter, you need heat, you need food.
Oh, Martin, I don't think likes Chris McCandless either. I don't want to say that okay. I want to edit what I said. No, I don't want to edit what I said. I want to clarify the fact that I don't think he deserved to die. I think he lived an adventure, and it was unfortunate. I think it was inevitable, but I don't want that to sound like he deserved to die. But yeah, I don't think there's no way I'm going to like make a pilgrimage to the bus that he died in, because I don't have enough respect for his approach to what he thought he was doing. Sandsock says, I have a Twitter friend from Australia. He's doing hyperponics on maybe 1.5 acres. Hyperponics?
Hydroponics, maybe.
Well, in Australia, everything's hyper.
Yeah, but pretty much everything wants to kill you.
We don't just do hydroponics here. We do hyperponics. That's not a hydroponic. It was mistaken plant identification. Yes, that's true. Yes, now I remember. Yeah, he ate the wrong type of wild food, which goes back to what I was saying, that, yay, I got the books, but I'm not doing it until someone who really knows their crap shows me. So if any of you guys live really close to me and you're an absolute rock star at foraging, we can talk. But because I would make that mistake. I would be looking up my plants and mistake like a 3-lobed, I don't even know what. I would make the mistake and eat something. I know it, because at the end of the day, inside I'm a country bumpkin, but up here I'm a city guy, right? I don't live the kind of life where I can just know this stuff, where I learned it through bouncing around in the hills and dales kind of thing.
Yep.
Yeah, he made all kinds of mistakes, but I mean, I'm just sort of, I don't want to get bogged down in any one thing and sort of stop the conversation. He made all kinds of weird mistakes. The thing is, it's when you start from a place of desire without knowledge, it's hard to get past that and start making the right choices. This is true in many things. Alain says, I went to see Into the Wild in the theater with a friend, not knowing what the story was about. Boy, I was down by the time the movie ended. I love it. Hi, Martin. I'm just trying to catch up with the side chat here.
Hey there.
Sandstock says the only way you can do that on a farm would be a grassland-based agriculture. Say 2/3 row crop, 1/3 hay or pasture. Some sort of ruminant animals, then sell stuff like honey, eggs, and beef. It's tough to do. Okay, fair enough. Fair enough. Like that. There's a thing. Like, do you keep bees? You know, I mean, like, how far does one go when one is trying to unhook rather than try to put your middle finger up at the government? Do you know what I'm saying? I don't know. It's such an interesting thing to me because I want to I want to think that I'd be good at that, at growing crops, or procuring food and being off the grid and all this stuff. But everything isn't the romantic ideal that I think it's going to be. In fact, nothing is the romantic ideal that I think it's going to be. Right?
At least you recognize this.
But I want it to be. All right, Martin, you're setting up as self-sufficient as you can a home out in the woods. What are you doing?
Well, I wouldn't do that. I could enjoy an off-grid existence, but that's because I would just want a simpler life. But I think this idea of self-sufficiency, as I said in my comment earlier that you read, I think that what people really want out of self-sufficiency is independence. They don't want to be subservient to somebody else. They don't want to have to obey somebody else. They don't want to have to sell their labor to somebody else. They feel alienated from the work of their own hands. They don't want that. And that's really what they want, is they just want to feel like they're living an authentic existence and that they're not simply doing the bidding of other people. But actually living in such a way that you don't need other people, that is an inhuman existence. Nobody does that. Our ancestors didn't do it. Our ancestors couldn't do it. We can't seem to succeed at this. Hermits don't manage it. They isolate themselves from people. They can be very misanthropic and stay away from people because they don't like them. But they depend materially on the existence of other people and the work of their hands.
Which is what I was saying about even our buddy Dick Prenicky. I mean, he was all self-sufficient and stuff, except he took shipments of, I think a plane landed twice a year with his rice and flour.
It was between 4 and 6 weeks.
4 and 6 weeks. So like, and I mean, I see Dick Prenicky as pretty close to the pinnacle, but you have to understand that we no longer have the kind of food existence that would allow someone to just live off of fish and, I don't know, seaweed. Like, what else would you eat out in the wilds of Alaska? Moose and stuff. Like, he needed rice, he needed flour, he needed gas. Maybe
he didn't need rice and flour. He would have had to have spent a lot of time hunting, but that's just it. If you want to live alone, you're probably going to die. That's what happened with our ancestors. There's no populations of people who live alone and only meet up with people long enough to mate. We're a social species. So the idea of sort of living alone and completely independently from other humans makes as much sense for humans as it does for bees and ants. We're a social species. It's just dumb to think that way. People who think that way, and I mean, not every homesteader thinks this way or anything like that. I'm not suggesting that. But those who really think that they can sort of live an existence that does not hinge on the existence of other people, having supplied them with knowledge and tools and the means for surviving day to day, those people are just living in a fantasy. I mean, that's completely self-deluded. That doesn't exist anywhere. It never has, and it never will. The nice thing about our species, what's sort of distinct, is we have these huge brains, and it allows us to transmit information down to our offspring, but also laterally to the people around us. And we can benefit from their ingenuity and their efforts, right? This doesn't make you a collectivist. It doesn't make you a Marxist or a communist or anything like that. You don't have to sort of veer away, out of a horror of communism, veer away and become, sort of a radical conservative libertarian who, thinks that the most important thing to have is guns and land, right?
Yeah.
You can't even have hand tools. Where are you going to get what are you going to start digging in the ground for ore and smelt it yourself? And
this is kind of what I was getting at. Like maybe you have to serve, and even homesteaders know other homesteaders, right? There are communities of homesteaders online. Okay, but I mean, even like around where Wrangler Star lives, there are other homesteaders, right?
Sure.
And so there's a certain amount of inter-homestead trade. I mean, but maybe self-sufficiency includes that then.
Yeah,
these are people who would talk about self-sufficiency until they're blue in the face. Granted,
yeah, but I think
waving an AR in the air, right? But
it's the self-sufficiency that I'm balking at. I think that expression is misleading. It leads people into thinking that they can really be sort of going it solo in the world, and that there's no such thing. What they want is autonomy. They want independence. They want autonomy, and autonomy doesn't mean you live alone. Or you live in isolation with other people. It means you get to decide your fate. That's what people want. Really, they just want liberty. They want autonomy. They want control over their fate, and they don't like having to work for another person and and being dictated to when they get up and what to wear and how they're going to greet people and how they're going to comport themselves at the office all day long, and then take home some money knowing that their employer or somebody else at the office who they think is less deserving has taken the lion's share, and stuff like that. I mean, people feel very strange and alienated.
Actually, you're kind of singing my tune right now.
Yeah.
But that's because I do a day job.
Right. Yeah. Well, I used to do a day job. I mean, I had an office job, and I know what that's like. So I can totally sympathize with people who feel that way. But anyway, this expression self-sufficiency, I think, is the mistake. It leads us down a garden path, right? Nobody is self-sufficient. There can't be a self-sufficient human, right? We're just not that kind of species. The world is too hard. We're not possessed with the right kinds of bodies and the right kinds of minds for that, right? We're just too delicate, right? We don't have big fangs, and we don't have fur, and we don't have a hide, and we don't have a turtle shell, or we can't live alone. We need other people. We need people to cover our backs. Most people with a match can't, out in the woods, can't start a sustaining fire.
Right.
I mean, true. Right. I mean, I just was out. Well, literally yesterday, I went out into the bush and I was harvesting some material to carve a bow drill set and just practice the bow drill. And I made a little video for a friend of mine who wanted to see how do you go about doing this. And so I just went out and did that for practice, right? But I have to practice it. If you don't practice it, I'm going to lose it, right? And that's what I mean. I had to learn this from other people who sort of perfected this, right? Starting a fire, right? This whole quest for fire thing that we were talking about earlier. Yeah, it's a real thing. It's a real amazing human invention and accomplishment.
Absolutely.
Right? It's like the birch bark canoe. It's a piece of high technology, but we've lost sight of that completely, right? We forget how much of the simplest things that we take for granted required a civilization.
Yeah, no, I get that. Well, so maybe the idea of self-sufficiency, maybe the term itself. Are we? Because I agree with you, and I think that it's a Schreberger. No?
It's not self-sufficient.
Oh, turn off Mac. Maybe we have to give the term. Shut up, Simo. I just used the worst French Canadian swear word online, but I'm not going to get demonetized because YouTube are non-knowledgeable at these things. Yeah. So, but is self-sufficiency like a term that is less I don't know the term I'm looking for, but like you're taking a very sort of maybe an etymological approach to it. This is what those words mean, but I think you're right. Maybe the people who are using these terms do mean it in a different way. And in that case,
it's pretty much like the woodcraft versus bushcraft.
Yeah, that's an old argument, though. It's a very old argument. Like, because woodcraft is an old term.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of feel that the term bushcraft kind of needs a trademark on it. It's like a Ray Mears trademark, kind of. So whenever I talk about bushcraft, I kind of inwardly kind of cringe at the term that I'm using. But the thing is, it's the perfect term, right? Because I'm not doing woodcraft, right? I'm not doing. I'm not Kephart. I'm not. Who's the other sort of hero? Kephart and. They each have a knife named after them.
Yeah.
Nessmuk, right? These guys are woodcraft guys, right? Ray Mears, bushcraft guy. Joe Robinette, bushcraft guy. Jesse Corbet, noted bushcraft guy. So, do we take the terms at face value, or do we sort of give them a little leeway?
Well, I think people sort of get led down a garden path. You can be bewitched by language. Right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what's problem with self-sufficiency. The words themselves, by virtue of their intrinsic ordinary meaning, lead people astray. They encourage people to think that a certain ideal is plausible when it's not. And really, it distracts people from what actually, I think, motivates them, which is a desire for autonomy and independence. That, I think, is what people are after. Right? But, what are you
but that's an attractive ideal, though, isn't it?
Well, it is. No, I mean,
on many levels, you know?
Yeah, it's commendable and worthy and praiseworthy. I don't think there's anything. I don't mean to be critical of people who are homesteaders, for instance. I mean that those people have decided, you know what, I want to be the master of my fate. I want to steer my own ship. I don't want to have a boss. Mm-hmm. I want to be able to sort of live off the fruits of my own labor without having to be paid by anyone. That's a commendable goal. That's great if you can do it. You know, by all means, do it. Yeah. But self-sufficiency drives people in a direction of imagining a kind of complete independence from society and not requiring it, while at the same time obviously having to rely on it day by day. They rely on it every day. So it's a mistake to go down that route. So that's why I sort of object to that expression. I think it just is inherently misleading. It's not that what people really want and are striving for is not worthy, or that I find it objectionable. I don't find it objectionable. I find it commendable. I mean, look at Mallory, right, and what she's doing, right? I mean, I think that's great what she's trying to do, right, or is doing, in fact. So I don't think that there's no delusion there, right? But I think some people really are deluded in their approach because they sort of get sucked in by certain terminology, and then certain politics tends to accompany it. And next thing you know, they're chasing this weird dream, this fever dream.
I do want to point out before we go any further, Sandsock is saying some really interesting stuff in the side chat here.
Yep.
He said something that, like, nothing wrong with being a conservative libertarian. We're very opposite politically, but we're not going to talk about that. But I'm also old enough to think that unless you say something really anathema, or I do, we're going to be okay. But then he followed up with something that, because I do know some very libertarian-minded people with farms and stuff, and what Sandsock says here is true of many of these people. I grew up different, but if one of you guys stopped by and just said hi, I would walk around my farm, send away some produce and eggs. I have found that with many of the people who I know who are very libertarian leaning homesteaders or farm people. I'm not a libertarian. I'm not a conservative. I'm not a Marxist. Let's not get scary on each other. But I do feel that, when people are in a comfortable place in terms of being confident in what their homestead or whatever does, there's a certain generosity that comes with that, right? I'm not saying this right. I don't know how to say this, but I'm saying that what Sandsock says here, I have seen or experienced with other homesteady libertarian people as well. And it's having grown up sort of on the left side of the spectrum. It was new to me to discover that, because when you're brought up on the left side, you sort of see your side as being the generous one, right? Because I will gladly pay my taxes so that the guy who can't work doesn't starve to death. And so you grow up thinking that you guys are the generous ones, but the fact is, people are generous, man. Unless they're selfish, but there's nobody who is selfish who wasn't brought up that way for some reason. We're community minded. We're, if we see someone fall on the street, we just run over, right? We go over, we say, "How are you okay?" And I feel that it's part of that. If I show up at Sandsock's farm, I would be confident that I would be treated that way, because I have enough experience with that. Granted, if I just sort of showed up at the gate of his farm, he might show up and say, "Who are you?" and get off my lawn. But I mean,
well, I hope that he asked this question to me and that he shot you, but that's another story.
Mallory says, "Yeah, forget about being 100% sufficient. I'm just happy not to rely on the store for wood, compost, and a select few veggies." Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
And Sandsock, by the way, says this is rural farm life, so.
Yeah, well, I grew up in a rural farming community.
I did too.
Yeah, well, that was sort of my way of life. Did you want to sort of take me up on some stuff that I was saying about agriculture and stuff like that? I had a feeling that you took exception to something there.
I definitely want to hear what you have to say, because especially like if you don't think that a farm is the way to do it, like just imagine that you, Simo, and we don't have the benefit of Mallory swinging by and doing it with us. We're setting up a homestead or some sort of self-sufficient life. Now, to you, it's a complete fallacy, which I get, because I think that to a certain extent it's the wrong terminology to use. I agree with you on that, but it's sort of the terminology that gets slung around.
Yeah.
So
we just want to be less dependent on others, right? We want to minimize our dependence on other people. We don't have to buy everything.
That's the thing. I don't want to have to buy everything. I don't want to have to buy everything, because I do know that at one point we didn't buy everything. And we live at a time when the corporations can't necessarily be trusted. You know what I'm saying? To give me the best value for my money.
Mm-hmm.
We live in a world where a Monsanto seed can blow onto a neighboring farm, and Monsanto can sue that farmer.
Yeah,
that's not the world I want to pay into.
Yeah. Well, see, agriculture is this weird thing. Okay, so a lot of people think that the way to sort of break free is to make sure that you can feed yourself. And most people can't hunt, and hunting is difficult.
Hunting is difficult.
And Are you familiar with the expression, the sedentary trap?
I've only heard it. I don't know much about it.
In anthropological circles, they talk about this thing that happens to civilizations. When a group of people start to develop agriculture, I mean, for most of human history, humans didn't farm, right? They didn't know how.
Yeah.
This was a huge. It's like controlling fire. It was a huge thing.
Yeah.
Being able to grow food, right? Because people lived a quite marginal existence when they had to hunt and gather their food. They had to follow herds and things like that. They were able to eventually practice some animal husbandry, but that took a while. But before that, people just had to gather what they could, and they could only eat so many fruits and vegetables and grains, only what was in season.
Yeah.
When it wasn't in season, you didn't have any, period.
Yeah.
And an apple didn't look like an apple today. Wasn't big, red, sweet, and juicy in the size of your fist. It was like those awful tart little green apples with almost no sugar in it, right?
It was also true of like corn and bananas.
True of every piece of
everything.
produce we eat.
Yeah.
Potatoes, everything. Everything we eat today is many times the size and the nutritional content than what it was for our ancestors. And of course, if you don't know how to grow things, then you're SOL. So hunter-gatherer was the way. But what happens is that hunter-gathering is difficult, but people who live hunter-gatherer lives have easy lives. They actually have a lot of leisure. They're not hunting all day long.
Yeah.
Right. But their numbers have to be small. They can't have huge populations because they can't generate enough food to sustain large populations. Yeah. That imposes a limit on their population. It also imposes a limit on how big any particular group or tribe can be, because they will enter into competition with others. And if you know anything about,
but at the same time, families were bigger than they are right now because they
way bigger.
They were in need of the manpower and the
they had no birth
to
control.
get things around.
There is that.
They had no birth control. Yeah. I mean, so families were bigger, but the point is, tribes. You didn't have tribes of 1,000 people. You had tribes of 50 to 300 or so people, right? That was sort of very, very typical, right? Tribes and bands and little chiefdoms like that, and they would have to enter into competition. I don't mean contrived competitions. I mean life and death competition for food and resources, right? Over hunting grounds, right? I mean, they would kill each other over access to hunting grounds. If someone invaded into someone else's hunting ground, it was life or death. This was war. And so this, created a huge cap on our numbers. And when we discovered agriculture, all of a sudden, for the first time in human history, that particular group of people has a surplus of calories, and it represents a triumph over marginality. And now their numbers can start to grow. And that's what happens. And then that's when you start to get the division of labor, right? Because you have huge numbers and people can concentrate their labor. Not everyone has to be a generalist, being able to do pretty much everything. You can devote, right? And then you can create classes of people that are devoted just to warfare and weaponry to defend the stores of grain that you are developing, that you're accumulating, right? So this is sort of the rise of the earliest, city states and stuff like that. Well, the sedentary trap is this thing that happens because hunter-gatherer living is fairly leisurely, but requires so much territorial knowledge that once you move to agriculture, you're screwed. There's no way back.
Right.
You forget how to hunt and gather. You stop being as good at it, right? So you don't immediately forget everything, but you slowly become less and less efficient. And as more and more of your population gets directed into the business of agriculture for sustaining your group, and fewer people are devoted to hunting, you get like a hunting class, right? You get huntsmen, right? Once you get there, you're in trouble. Now that traditional knowledge disappears and people forget. And we have that today. Most people today think hunting. I mean, honestly, think about this. Most people today, including people who eat meat and savor it, think hunting is icky and kind of gross. And they think ill of hunters, right? Somehow, beef farming, that's okay, chicken farms, battery farms, that's, they don't have to think about that. But the idea of someone going out and killing an animal, a lone animal, by his wits and with weaponry and skill, this they think is kind of icky. That's how estranged we are from the kinds of critters that we actually are, right? There's nothing unnatural about hunting, but we think it's unnatural because we have been denatured, right? So the sedentary trap is this thing that happens to cultures and civilizations. They become estranged from the know-how, the knowledge of hunting and its responsible practices.
Right.
And then animals stop being something that you have to understand and think about and care about in order to kill them, because you can't kill them unless you understand their behaviors and know their behaviors very well. That entails a certain amount of respect. I mean, most of the people I know
Thank you for putting that word in there.
Most people who hunt are actually fairly respectful of animals. Not everyone. And people who are anglers tend not to be so much. They tell themselves a lot of lies about fish not feeling pain and similar nonsense. But that's because they're not fishing for food. They're fishing just for catch and release, right? They just like to torture fish for fun, right? That's how estranged we are, right? Okay. We think that catching an animal and tormenting it on a hook, right, and reeling it in and pulling it out of the water so that it can't breathe, which would be equivalent to like sticking your head underwater for a few minutes. And then just tossing it back like it's a piece of garbage, right? That they think is fun, and they think it's sporting. That's the humane way to fish. It's called catch and release, and that's the way you should fish.
Right.
Which I think is the sheerest barbarism. You have to have completely forgotten that there's a little animal there suffering, and feeling pain and all the rest of it, and just completely terrified. If you have any doubt, notice how quickly it tries to get away. So we are completely estranged from this. And the sedentary trap is this thing where we fall into a sedentary agrarian way of life, and we forget what it was like. And so now we think that agriculture is normal and natural. You said it yourself, we've got it figured out. We haven't got it figured out. One of the earliest civilizations on a large scale to practice agriculture was in an area known as the Fertile Crescent.
Yep.
Have you looked at the Fertile Crescent today? Not very fertile.
Nope, there's nothing there.
Just read the Bible. It's full of mentions of bears and tigers and lions, right? And pomegranates growing everywhere. And like, ain't none of that happening, right? This place is a desert, right? Yeah. Desertification is the result of agriculture. And that's because we live off of agriculture. We don't live off of the hunting of animals. We still live off of the eating of animals, but not the hunting of them. Because we live off of the fruits of agriculture so much now, we think that that's the way it was supposed to be. We forget that flour from grain is a completely modern innovation. Right? I mean, and flour as a staple requires a civilization. It requires a class of people who know how to practice agriculture.
It requires a miller.
The technology to mill. Exactly. It requires the capacity to store it and the capacity to guard it against other people who would try to obtain it and keep it dry and all of this, right? You need a civilization to make flour at a large scale. I mean, you can grind acorns into like a bitter flour if you want. I mean, I've done that. Not so great, I got to say. But you can grind things into a flour, but it's incredibly laborious and time-consuming and hardly worth the calories, right? But when you have a large-scale civilization and you have a division of labor, now that thing that was unprofitable labor and not worth the calories is now worth the calories, and so we do it. Yep. And so the sedentary trap is where we lose sight of the way we used to be, and now agriculture seems like it's the natural way. And we forget what agriculture is. Right. Agriculture is destroying grasslands, destroying marshlands, cutting down forests, burning them down sometimes. And when you do that, when you break the soil, when you till a plot of land, you rip out all of the vegetation on that land. You kill all of the insects on that land, all the worms, all the salamanders, all the turtles, You kill all the other insects, the mammals that live in the ground and feed on all of those things, all the bird life, the small predators that feed on that animal life. You are destroying that. And you're destroying, of course, all the vegetation, right down to the level of bacteria. This is biotic cleansing. Agriculture, all agriculture, including the potted plants in your garden, if you're doing like, square foot gardening in boxes, that's a monoculture that you've done, that you've put there. That is biotic cleansing. And it has a terrible effect when it's done on a large scale. So when you do this to the ground, it causes desertification. I mean, it's not just sort of harmful to all of the biota, all of the living things who inhabited it before, but it completely erodes topsoil. Almost all of the desertification that is happening on the planet is happening on the arable land, right? That's land that we can farm, that we've decided to make farmable.
Yep.
It is farmable in principle, even if it means cutting down forests, right? The more agriculture there is, the more desertification there is, and the faster it happens. And it happens for a lot of reasons. When you remove plant life, when you remove grasses, for instance, when you remove perennial plants and you plant annuals, the kinds of things that we like to eat, they have very shallow roots. And when it rains, there's very little holding the soil together, the way a forest does and ground litter does, and the way grasses do, for instance. And so the soil washes away. It washes away and it silts our rivers, and it changes the ecology of our lakes and rivers and creeks and all the rest of it. And the ground starts to harden up and bake hard. And you need the deep roots because the soil gets wetted deep down by roots. When it rains, the soil can only absorb so much moisture, and then the rest goes off as runoff. The water just runs away. It doesn't get absorbed into the soil. Water gets absorbed into soil along root canals, along root channels.
That's why grasslands are so valuable.
That's right, exactly. And wetlands also filled with grasses, right? And those are deep-rooted things. Same with trees, very deep roots, right? Yeah. So this is the thing. We now think agriculture is the way. This is the ecologically sound way that's going to save us. But practically all of the desertification that's happening is there. And things like forests and grasslands, those are the ways to secure and sequester carbon. And every time you cut them down, you release carbon, right? And every time I don't know if you're aware of this, but I mean, when you about less than a century ago now, scientists realized that we have maybe 60 cycles of agriculture left because we just don't have enough nitrogen fertilizer. We just don't have the fertilizer that we need. Now, there's one thing that saved us from massive starvation, and that's called the Haber-Bosch process. It's a way of using petroleum to create nitrogen fertilizer. Almost all the fertilizer in the world for our agriculture is a product of oil. If we don't dig oil out of the ground, we're all going to starve, right? So we're completely estranged from how agriculture works. We think it's a natural thing. Oh, look, I plant things in my garden, and there you go, right? But I mean, ask anyone who's a backyard gardener. You need to work on compost, right? And you need animals for a compost.
You need manure.
You need manure. Exactly. And you need bone meal, right? I mean, you need decaying animals. You need bone meal, right? You
need blood meal. You need
blood meal, and exactly.
Yep.
So we don't realize how much animal death is required for your lettuce. Your organic, vegan lettuce, actually requires dead animals. And we have to sort of get over this plate fright. I don't want to see animals on my plate. Well, there's animals on your plate even when it's just a plate of lettuce. Right? I mean, living organisms other than plants are necessary for this. So this is sort of the concern that I have with agriculture. We don't have it dialed in. We've been doing it for so long, and the decay rate has been slow enough that we think, the analogy I heard recently was that it's like we took a running jump off of a cliff in this contraption, and we think it's a plane, and it's just going to fly indefinitely, but really it's a glider, and we're running out of lift, and we're going to hit the ground. It's going to happen. And technology is the only thing that's kept us up right now for agriculture on this large scale. So my sense is, I think restorative agriculture, or what's sometimes called regenerative agriculture, is sort of the way forward in the future. We need to.
Is that where they rewild areas?
Yeah, you do a lot of rewilding. You introduce a lot of animals, a lot of livestock. You eat the livestock, but you move them around an awful lot. Are any of you familiar with the work of Alan Savory and the Savory Institute?
I saw a talk by, I believe, him or someone at his institute at one point.
Yeah, there's a wonderful TED talk he gave years ago. Like
that's probably what I'm thinking of, actually.
Yeah, just look up Alan Savory, Savoury, Savory, like the word savory. Yep. Alan Savory, TED
Another
talk.
one is Joel Salatin in the U.S.
Yeah, that's right. He's part of that same movement.
Yep.
So I think we need to move in that direction and away from sort of, vertical agriculture and hydroponics and stuff like that. I think we need to sort of restore the earth. And what that's going to mean is we're going to have to sort of draw back on our population, because there's no way that we're going to do it without huge amounts of agriculture, increasing amounts of agriculture. But we're desertifying the planet really fast. And there's no way to make topsoil. There's only one thing that can make topsoil, and that's huge quantities of livestock. Huge quantities. Like, people worry about how many beef cattle there are, like, in North America, and all of the methane that they're producing. Those herds are nothing compared to the bison. There was something.
Oh, geez, yeah.
Is Alan Savory the guy who was talking about de-desertifying Africa with huge herds of cattle?
Not huge herds, but yeah, herds. Yes, yeah. But not just that. He's done the experiment in Africa. He's done the experiment in the United States. There's a lot of people. That's what the Savory Institute does. They're part of this.
I saw his TED talk, then that's why I know who he is. Sandsock says that is what conservation is. It's the wise use of resources. I was able to see our soil change for the better. We're on the same page. I feel that getting away from chemical inputs is probably an important step. I'm not saying that everyone has to, do a straight up organic farm or anything, but crop rotation and livestock rotation can.
Crop rotation is something. Unfortunately, it's not the only thing.
No, but
because
like if you allow fields to go fallow and you've got cattle and you move them around a bit, I think you can probably mitigate things to a certain extent. But it's just
there's still a lot of work. Even if you're putting cattle into a field and let the feces to decay, you still have work to do to mitigate the bacteria and whatever is carrying to the feces in a good manner. I mean, to not just let it alone.
Yeah, I mean, if you would just let a herd loose in an area and they just start crapping all over, the first rain, what will happen is you'll get like huge contaminations in your local water of E. coli from right. I mean, so there's a way to do this, right?
Or if it's a pig farm, you get algae blooms in the nearest lake.
Right, exactly.
Yes, it depends on how you deal with feces and manure.
Yeah. Now sort of animals sort of have their own way of dealing with this, right? The reason they don't all poison themselves and poison every species around them in large herds is because large herds have to move because they graze, and once they've nibbled everything down till it's really, really short, they have to move.
Yeah.
And they have to move for two reasons. They have to move because they've eaten what there is to eat there. That's worth their effort. And predators come after them.
Yeah.
Predators find them, are drawn to herds, right? So they just keep moving. So you can't get rid of the predators. You can't kill, the wolves and so forth. They have to be there. They have a sort of a critical role in that ecology of keeping herds on the move. Like if we forget that there was something like 400 million bison in North America, and that's just the bison.
Yep.
Right, and no one was worried about methane, right?
Yeah.
And that's because livestock methane is not releasing carbon in the worrisome way, right? It's like when people talk about all the water that they consume. Yeah, but they piss out most of that water, right? Like they don't just right, exactly. It just goes right back, right? It comes out in their sweat, it comes out in their respiration, it comes out in their urine, it comes out in their feces, and it comes out of their bodies when they die and get slaughtered. So people talk about all the enormous amounts of water. Well, I mean, good grief, it's not like they made off with it, right? There's no one's making or stealing water, right? It's just right. Lavoisier. Lavoisier. That's right. So what we worried about with respect to things like water and carbon is when you release carbon that's not part of the cycle. Like for instance, oil. Right. When you take oil out of the ground and you burn it, you release all that carbon in. Right. That's not part of any cycle. That's just new carbon that's not going to get cycled back into the environment. Right. It will take forever for that carbon to get sequestered. And that's the problem. So, you don't have to worry about cattle farts. I mean, that's just ridiculous.
Okay. So, Martin, so to you, self-sufficiency is a myth, and the farming aspect is
not long-term sustainable.
Not long-term sustainable. So you're definitely on this side of this, that it is a myth.
It has to be, as I say, it has to be restorative or regenerative agriculture that we have to practice. We can't go the vegan route. We can't go the vegetarian route. Like that's death. It's guaranteed, right? And we can only sustain this population, much less a growing population, with oil. We need oil and natural gas for things like the Haber process to produce the fertilizer. There's not enough fertilizer on the planet. There's not enough topsoil on the planet to feed us all, right?
And we're getting less and less of it all the time.
Yeah, my sister-in-law, it's really funny. My sister-in-law, we had this conversation. She said, oh yeah, but we have hydroponics. And I was like, hydroponics, plants have nutritional needs, right?
Yep.
You don't just shine a light on them and sit them in water.
It's going to work.
They grow, right? Those nutrients have to come from somewhere. You got to pour them into the water.
Yeah. There's no inputs soil. Galore. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's tons of inputs, right? And all of that stuff has to be extracted and synthesized artificially. It has to be trucked and shipped around, all of which requires fuel again. So hydroponics is not a solution. Hydroponics is a way of growing something in certain areas where there's no soil whatsoever, where you have access to all of these resources. But I mean, that is a super rich man's game. That's what that is.
Right.
Yeah, so I think, it's fine that people want to have their hobby farms and their homesteads and they want to farm. That's good. I mean, most people there are not going to, who are doing that, are not operating on a scale that's going to endanger anything or anyone. But they need to understand that the fertilizer that they're getting, that they're buying, if they're buying any, there are ways around that. But that fertilizer has to come from somewhere. And that fertilizer is dependent on oil and natural gas. And it has to be trucked and shipped around on top of that, on top of the process, natural gas and oil being necessary for the very process of manufacture that fertilizer. So that's my concern. I think we can't go this route. We need to sort of move further back to the way, closer to the way our ancestors lived. It doesn't mean that we have to sort of, forsake computers and all of that, but we have to sort of stop thinking of agriculture as anything other than an experiment, and stop thinking of it as the way God made the world for us. Right. He didn't create a garden for us to inhabit. That's just not the case.
So it may be, with 4 minutes left of this live stream, maybe I'm opening a can of worms at the wrong time, but wouldn't going back to a more restorative agriculture require population controls?
You bet.
Yeah.
Yep. No one likes the thought of that. That's sort of the ugly thing. But no matter what you think about that, there's going to be a number that's going to be too many.
Yeah.
Right. So you can think about what that number needs to be and what humane steps we can take in that direction. And my view is you can't just outlaw reproduction. It's never going to work. You have to incentivize people having limits on it. So you have to incentivize having some very small families.
Yeah.
And you can't reward, large families anymore. It's just crazy. You can't give tax breaks and stuff like that. That's really going the wrong way. Mm-hmm. It doesn't matter where you are in the world. Humans, the population rate is going to go up. Educating women.
Look at what Chris just said.
What's that?
The global population increased by an estimated 20,000 individuals, births minus deaths during this live stream.
Yeah. Think of all the farmland that has to be created for those mouths.
Jesus.
That farmland doesn't exist already. That farmland has to be created.
Yep. That's where the Amazon is going. It's turning into burgers. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So look, we're down to our last 2 minutes. So I think we've established that Martin thinks that self-sufficiency is a myth, and that agriculture is bad.
By the way, the fifth comment in this live stream today, tonight, was mine, and I was saying straight away, self-sufficiency is a myth. Next question.
I saw it.
Yeah, I think that true self-sufficiency is definitely a myth, but that there's, I guess I'm not looking at the words in quite the same sort of. I see the value to a more independent life.
Yep.
I don't see the possibility of unhitching from society completely. I know people who are straight up libertarians, but they still go into town and do commerce. You know what I'm saying? Like they're still driving cars and truck. Well, let's face it, they're driving trucks.
Yep.
But the idea of sort of looking out over your food that you're bringing up, it's attractive. I don't know if I could do it. I don't have the skills required to do it. And partly my philosophy is formed by the fact that I really hate the diesel stink of cities. I don't like living surrounded by 90-degree angles. I feel constantly oppressed by city life. And so the idea of living like Dick Prenneke, even though a plane had to come and dump him his stuff every 4 to 6 weeks, is attractive on that. But here's the thing. I don't know if I'd be happy being that alone, because I am very cognizant of the fact that we are very social individuals. So we're a social species,
Is one of you has heard about another YouTube channel called Not Just Bikes?
No.
He's an Canadian expat in the Netherlands.
Okay.
And he has a running series right now about urbanism and the way that things really should be. Not only from living in a city, but also the economics behind this.
Right. Hi, Grace.
Hey, Grace. So, and I was watching one of his vid today in that series. He's that's a very good. He's making good points about the way that cities should be built and why the way that our suburban life has been put on in North America is not sustainable.
What's
Don't
the name
start.
of the title again? No?
Not just bikes.
Not just bikes.
Thank you.
Yeah, don't start that conversation now, Simone, because we're after 11 o'clock, and I'm going to want to talk about it. So we'll do that one next time. So yeah, we are at 11 o'clock. I do want to end with what Alain said. I agree. The world population is too high, but the economy, and this is what we didn't talk about, but I kind of didn't want to go there. The economy is actually, it's very much based on constant growth. Hello, unsustainable as hell. But we don't have time to talk about that. Thanks for bringing it up anyway.
Good point.
So we're after 11, so we're going to shut it down. Thanks to you two for coming on screen. Thanks to Russell for coming on briefly and then disappearing. To everyone in the side chat who's still with us, between now and next week, be safe, be healthy, be sane, and be kind to one another.
Forget about the same.
Why you got to be like that? Bye.
Bye, guys.